All right, cool. Here we go. Welcome back into the Field Goals Podcast, everybody. I am your host, Dan Viennes. We are looking ahead now. We spent enough time looking back on the big upset win over the Broncos Monday, 17-16, that the NFL world is still talking about. And, of course, we will touch on that a little bit today because I have a very special guest joining me, formerly of ESPN Radio, Roto World, Pro Football Talk, and now producing and hosting the Niners Nation podcast. Please welcome Rob Guerrera to the show. Rob, thanks for joining me. How are things down there?
Well, not great, Dan.
I mean, I thought we would ease into this, but let's just start where we need to start. Let's talk 49ers first. The loss at Chicago. My impressions from the outside looking in is the conditions in that game were just a near monsoon. The field conditions were horrible in that game, but all eyes were on Trey Lance and his first real start as the guy. We think he's the guy in San Francisco. Your overall impressions to start with right off the top on how Trey Lance performed against the Bears.
I think it was what you expected to see from him. It was choppy. There were some easy throws that he missed, some open guys that he missed, and then there were some eye-popping, like, wow throws that we haven't seen around these parts in quite some time. Quite honestly, since Colin Kaepernick was the starting quarterback, really. But like you said, the conditions were not ideal. The game didn't go his way, and as soon as they got down by 2 scores and really had to rely on the pass, the heavens opened up and it was like biblical rain. It was comical. It was so bad, Dan, that the broadcast actually switched to the snow graphics on the field where they make the numbers and the yard lines black. That's how crazy it was. So it was really kind of hard to evaluate, especially when they really had to go into pass mode.
Yeah. You can definitely see why, as historical as that stadium is, you can see why the plans for the new one include a roof. That was brutal. But you make an interesting point, the comparison to Colin Kaepernick and his game. Did you see any stylistic differences in how Kyle Shanahan was operating the offense with Lance at the helm?
There were some. Well, first of all, there was a lot more quarterback power. I think there were at least 3 quarterback powers, which you were not going to see with Jimmy Garoppolo. And they also ran a triple option, which I loved. They had Debo in the backfield. Lance faked it to Debo coming out of the backfield, then took off around the edge. And then when the defender stepped up, he flipped it to Elijah Mitchell for a 5 or 6 yard gain. Jimmy Garoppolo definitely wasn't doing that. I loved that. I wanted to see more of that, frankly, and I hope they do in the weeks to come. So there were some differences between Trey Lance and how Jimmy Garoppolo used to run things.
Yeah, lots of third down conversions with his legs. One was a 3rd and 13, I think. It definitely adds a different element there. Talk about the performance of the team as a whole. It sounds like when you read Twitter and you see some of the reaction from the fan base, there was some unease with how the offensive line played as a whole. What do you make of the rest of the roster and how they showed up?
Yeah, the offensive line was not good in this game. To me, it was an example of their grades on paper might have looked good, but when you watch the game, Trey Lance had to avoid so many sacks, and there were so many plays with early pressure where he had to move around. I think it kind of hid some of the problems on the offensive line. But overall, the team played great. Justin Fields didn't complete a pass to a wide receiver until the 3rd quarter in the game. The Bears had less than 70 total yards at halftime of this game. There were some big plays that they made that I feel like kind of distorted how well the team played. The big problem for the 49ers was penalties. 12 penalties for 99 yards in the game, including extending drives. Every time the Bears scored a touchdown, there was a penalty that extended the drive that allowed it to continue and help them score. That was really what sank the 49ers. Other than that, they played well, particularly on defense.
And the fumble by Debo didn't help. That was a nice drive, and they were getting down inside the red zone. Talk about Debo Samuel, because he's one of the most intriguing players, I think, on that roster. And there was a lot of talk this offseason, especially with him signing a new big deal and questions around that about his usage. And there was a lot of reporting done about what he wanted his role to be and what it was going to be and whether that would evolve once they signed him long-term. Had 8 carries, I think, out of the backfield and used as a receiver. What can Seahawks fans expect to see out of Debo Samuel on Sunday?
Expect to see a ton of Debo. Elijah Mitchell, the Niners starting running back, got hurt in the first half of this game. He's going to be out for 8 weeks. they are going to make Debo the lead back. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to get 15 carries a game, but he'll probably get, I would say, 8 to 10 carries out of the backfield. They're going to target him. They are going to run the offense through Debo Samuel, which is sometimes frustrating for me because he was such a get out of jail free card for them last year. People don't realize, like, they would get to the red zone and it would be like, just give the ball to Debo. 3rd and 7, hand the ball to Debo. And he got it on so many occasions. It was unbelievable. But we live in a different world now than last year, right? Defenses and coordinators and coaches have had a year now to study this, to watch what the 49ers do, watch what their tendencies are, watch how Debo himself runs the ball. So I don't think it's going to be nearly as effective as it was last year. But you, as a Seahawks fan, get ready to see 19 with the ball in his hands a lot.
All right. I was ready for that anyway, but he's such a dynamic player. It's even as an opponent, he's just fun to watch. And he's one of those guys that can garner a lot of jealousy from opposing fans. You know, that might translate as hate, but everybody wants him on their team. Another guy that everybody would probably like to have on their team. Let's talk about George Kittle. He's already wrecked my fantasy lineup. Last time the Seahawks saw Kittle in Seattle, 9 catches, 181 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a dominating performance. He's done that many times against this team, but he came up with an injury before the opener. It was a practice injury, wasn't it? He
Monday of week 1. Yep.
Groin. Yep. And didn't practice yesterday. He's been described as day-to-day. How does his absence affect this offense?
It makes a huge, huge difference, not only through the passing game, which obviously, you know, as you just said, he can be a devastating receiver, but in terms of blocking, we just talked about how the 49ers offensive line struggled blocking. That's one of the best things that Kittle does. So even if he doesn't have an impact in the passing game, he can still have a major impact on the game because he's so good as a blocker. He can obviously clear the way for running plays and also just give the quarterback more time. Not having him, the drop off between George Kittle and, say, Ross Dwelly or Charlie Warner, the other tight ends for the 49ers, is massive. Kittle's versatility will be incredibly missed. And the frustrating thing for me is that Trey Lance has started 3 games in his career and George Kittle has missed 2 of them. So they don't even really have any kind of on-field chemistry. They haven't really built that up yet. So it's frustrating because I really want to see what this offense can be when all the weapons are there.
Is this the year we see Brandon Ayuk kind of burst onto the scene as well? Maybe a breakout year for him?
We thought that's what I was expecting and hoping going into week 1, and they hit Ayuk right out of the gate on the first drive with a beautiful 31-yard pass, and I was like, okay, here we go. Like, here's the Ayuk coming out party, and then he got 1 target the rest of the day. And it's so frustrating because he's the guy that Lance has been working out with the most. Since Trey was drafted, he and Brandon Ayuk have been working out in the off seasons, spending a ton of time together. If he's got that chemistry I was just talking about with anybody, it's with Ayuk. But for some reason, they have not been able to get the ball in his hands as much as I think they should. And I hope it's something that they definitely focus on this week because I think he's really good. I think he's way better than he's shown and way better than people realize.
How long is the leash for Trey Lance? Given, I think so many people were surprised that the 49ers ended up keeping Jimmy Garoppolo, signing him to that new deal, which includes the no trade clause and all of that. So he's sitting there. He's presumably healthy enough to play, right? How long is the leash given the fact that the 49ers roster is one that's built to contend now?
It's not as long as it should be. And that's the frustrating thing for me. Trey Lance hasn't started games in consecutive weeks for over 1,000 days. He needs time. The last time he started 2 straight games was December of 2019. All right. It's 2022. Just let this kid play. He shouldn't be penalized just because we think the 49ers are in this so-called Super Bowl window. Yeah. Remember, they are the ones, the 49ers themselves are the ones that decided that Jimmy Garoppolo's play was simply not good enough. And they didn't just get a replacement quarterback. They traded 3 first-round draft picks plus more to move up to replace Jimmy Garoppolo. So that should tell them how badly they thought they needed to upgrade at the position. Yeah. So why then would you then bench Trey Lance for that exact same guy? It's not even for a different player, right? It's literally for the guy you thought you had to move heaven and earth to replace. But as long as Jimmy is there, They know that they have won games while he is there, even if he hasn't been the biggest part of it. So I think that's going to be a real thing. Chris Sims said this week that he's heard that there are already players in the locker room that think that Jimmy Garoppolo is better than Trey Lance right now. So if they keep losing, it's going to become a thing. The calls for Jimmy Garoppolo will start coming not only from the media, but also from inside the house, from inside the 49ers locker room. So Trey has to win. Otherwise, he's going to have to deal with that, and it's just going to get louder and louder and louder.
Interesting. It'll be fascinating to watch. One of my favorite things to watch is young quarterbacks developing and all the things that entails. Probably helps the situation there, though, that it was a very uneven week, shall we say, in the NFC West, with who would have thought the Seahawks sitting on top at 1-0 and everybody else sitting at 0-1. Hard to tell. Hard to really judge that Rams performance because they may have been going up against the best team in the NFL this season in the Buffalo Bills. But the Arizona Cardinals look like a team with some issues. There may be a little bit of grace here provided by the division in that process down there, right?
Yeah, the Cardinals. I mean, that's supposed to be the good Arizona Cardinals, right? Before they have their December collapse, and they look terrible against the Chiefs. I am a little worried about Stafford's arm. I think that is a much bigger story than has gotten covered. Like he looked weird throwing the ball. He looked like it was much more over the top for him than normal. So I'm skeptical there. The frustrating thing for the 49ers is they're the only NFC West team with a loss in the conference, right? Everybody else lost to an AFC team, which when it comes to seeding and division titles and tiebreakers and things like that does matter.
Well, and not just Stafford, but the fact that, Cam Akers was expected to shoulder the load there in the running game, and it was kind of called out by McVay afterwards, might be in the doghouse. So there might be some issues there in Los Angeles as well. Let's talk about the opponent this week. I always love getting the perspective of someone from another fan base, someone on the outside looking in. I just want to know, first of all, 4 days later, you've had a chance to process it. Your overall impressions of what we saw here on Monday night with the Seahawks pulling off the shocker, the way that they did, and how that game ended as well. Did you ever expect to be playing a 1-0 Seahawks team this week?
Not in a million years. I'm not going to lie. I thought you were going to get killed. I loved all the emphasis that Pete Carroll put on the game. That place was rocking, man. Like in a way that Lumen usually doesn't rock. Like that's a raucous stadium to begin with, but everybody was so pumped up. The way they brought in all those guys, that meant more to the Seahawks than a normal week 1 game. I don't care what they say, and they're not even really trying to hide it.
No. It's the most raw and open I've heard Pete Carroll in the comments he made yesterday. It's really shocking.
What I'm wondering, and I'd like to get your perspective on this, is it possible the Seahawks come in on, a little emotionally drained, and maybe there's a bit of a letdown coming off a game that was clearly more to them than a typical week 1 game?
Absolutely. And I think it really it could be an early litmus test on where this team is, where this roster is. Remember, this is a very young roster. They're playing a lot of rookies and a lot of young guys, and a quarterback who hasn't started a lot of games in the last 8 years. It's with a new scheme on defense and new coaches on defense. I'm just fascinated to see how they come out and respond and play week 2, whether they win or not. Because to me, and I know that I'm not your typical fan, I love this process. I thought it was time for a rebuild. It was time to move on from Russell. I'm fascinated to see how they've augmented the roster this year. Thought they had their best draft since 2012. And I know it's all about getting the quarterback next year. So I'm watching a lot of college football on Saturdays this year. But it's not surprising to me they were more competitive than people expected because, when you're close to the program and you watch what's happening here, I did think there was a lot more talent on this roster than the national media was giving us credit for, but it's young talent. And how did they respond coming off of that? Because they had 3 months to get ready for this game. Emotionally, schematically, they knew Russell as well as anyone. They could have a plan. It was the best time for them to play Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos. They had the element of surprise. They had the home crowd, as you pointed out, loudest I've heard it in the stadium since probably 14.
Wow.
And legitimately, maybe it got that loud at times a couple years ago, the game at the end that was for the division, the Jacob Hollister game against the Niners. But yeah, do they come out and fall flat this week against an opponent that they've owned 15 out of 17 dating back to 2013, last 4 in a row? how do they respond emotionally and physically with all those young guys? Do they come out and play well? Because to me, as a Seahawks fan and guy who covers the team, if they come out this week and play well, win or lose, but especially if they win, this team might have a chance to compete with the roster they have.
First of all, that game in 2019 is the Dre Greenlaw game. Let's just get that straight. I want to ask you about Geno Smith because I'm outside the Seahawks bubble and I want to be skeptical about this. And I know that he played better than people thought he was going to play. But in the second half of that game, he was like, 6 of 10 for 35 yards or something like that. He did not exactly light it up in the second half, although to be fair, he played great in the first half.
He did.
My hope is that the 49ers pass rush is going to be able to get to him and really make life miserable. They played great against the Bears. Justin Fields is a freaking wizard, so he kind of saved them a lot of the times. Geno doesn't have that type of mobility. So am I right to assume that the Niners pass rush is going to be able to get to Geno a little bit?
Well, you're going up against 2 rookie tackles, and as good as those guys have looked at times, Charles Cross in particular looked like a rookie on Monday night. He had his great moments. He handled Chubb in the first half, and in the second half, Chubb threw some things at him that he couldn't handle, and he got beat on some bull rushes. Abe Lucas on the right side looked like a 10-year vet and really had a really clean game. There was the one holding call that nullified a long Rashad Penny run. It was a questionable call, but still, those guys are young, and they're going to see things they haven't seen. And going up against Bosa and those guys, to me, that's the matchup of the game. Geno surprised me in a couple of ways, and one of them was his pocket presence. The way that he was able to kind of command the pocket or stay in there and show some poise when it was breaking down. The touchdown of Disley was one where he kept his eyes down the field and kind of eluded a sack in a way that we're not used to seeing, because when you've watched Russell Wilson for 10 years, you see the spin out, you see a lot of crazy scrambles and change of direction. Geno's more of a traditional drop back quarterback and just kind of manipulated the pocket a couple of times. I think what we saw from Geno on Monday is kind of what we're going to see for the most part, as long as he's playing. There's going to be times where he plays well. I do think he's learned over the years to be more careful with the football. I do think he sees the field well. He makes good decisions. He knows how to operate the offense at the line of scrimmage. I do think the offense fits him better. This Shane Waldron kind of Rams hybrid offense they wanted to run last year, a lot of the core principles of that offense didn't fit what Russell does well or what he likes to do. So we saw a lot more use of the tight ends. We saw a lot more kind of creative formations and things like that. But this team's going to try to run the football. And they got away from that a little bit Monday. Penny only had 12 carries. That shocked me. I think you'll see him get 20 touches this Sunday, in particular, because they're going to be concerned about that pass rush. I actually made a comparison the other day that you might appreciate. To me, Geno Smith, when he's playing at his best, his ceiling is kind of young before he sort of developed his game. Young Alex Smith. Like, he's got to control the game. He's got to run the offense. He's got to convert third downs, make the easy throw, make the occasional nice throw. He's going to have some clunkers, though. He's not a guy who's going to go out there and be Ryan Tannehill, who rediscovers himself and reinvents himself when he gets his second chance. There's going to be bad games. And with the rookie tackles going against that pass rush Sunday, it'll be a test.
How much should I worry about Kenneth Walker? I keep seeing Kenneth Walker is going to play. The Seahawks. Is this like a real threat at running back?
If he's 100%, I think so. But here's my take on running backs: is they need time to play. He hasn't seen anything. That instinctive part of being a running back takes time. You can't just come out cold and be able to have that kind of vision, especially a guy who's brand new to the league and playing at a different speed. He only had the one preseason game, but everything they saw from him in the preseason and in practices just kind of validated all the reasons they took him in the second round. And you can say all you want about whether that's a good usage of draft resources. He's a dynamic talent, and I think they see him as the long-term answer at running back, whether they re-sign Penny after this season or not. But I look back to what Penny did last year, and once he was healthy and got back on the field, it took 3 or 4 weeks for him to get on that role. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of impact from him right away. That injury, I've heard some doctors talk about it, and they say it shouldn't restrict him functionally at all. They kind of inserted some mesh in there to hold that area together. but they describe it as being very strange, and it takes some getting used to, and it feels weird. I don't suspect he'll get a lot of, no matter how much they talk about it this week. I think he might get 5 or 6 touches, maybe be used in a third down role. He does catch the ball well out of the backfield. I think by the time, if they all stay healthy, by the time the Niners come back December 15th, it might be a different story, because I do think they see this as a two-headed monster. And if both those guys are healthy, it can be a dynamic running game. I don't expect much impact from him on Sunday.
I was a little surprised that after the Seahawks won, the spread for this 49ers game actually went up. It went from like 8.5 to Niners minus 9.5. I think Vegas is nuts. Have they not seen 49ers Seahawks games for the past 10 years? When have the 49ers ever played the Seahawks in the past decade where they've won by 10 or more points? Like, when? It doesn't happen. Weird stuff happens in these games.
Well, and I wonder if maybe the two factors that they're looking the hardest at is what we've touched on already, that pass rush against the rookie tackles, and the fact that maybe they are banking on a bit of a letdown. It's a short week. That could be a factor, and having to turn around quickly and readjust emotionally after that. It's I can't wait to see how it turns out. There's a lot of history in this matchup, interesting history involving lots of different players. And this could kind of be the next era of, let's see how Trey Lance performs and how he steps up against the Seahawks, because Jimmy G didn't always play well. And that was part of the reason that the Seahawks have won the last few matchups is he made some key mistakes at key moments. And if Trey plays, look, I'm not a betting guy, but I would pick the 49ers in this game. I think they deserve to be the favorite. NFL Network just had 9 of their 10 guys, Daniel Jeremiah being the only outliner, that picked the 49ers. And, I think it's fair.
With Trey Lance, I have said there are not going to be any gimme wins. Whereas I think with Jimmy Garoppolo on the schedule, a lot of times you're like, that's a win. You feel pretty confident because there's so much variance with Trey. But honestly, he threw the 1 interception last week. If that's not in the 49ers red zone, I don't know that necessarily that the Bears win that game, because that's really what broke the back of the Niners, was that he threw the interception so deep in 49ers territory. Chicago was able to cash in on it. Then it's a 2-score game. Then the heavens opened up and it was over after that point. So if Trey can just limit the turnovers, I feel like that is really going to help. And that should be enough, but you never know with a quarterback that's so inexperienced like he is. It's a complete wild card every single week. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be also incredibly nerve-wracking.
Well, what makes it even more mysterious is I don't know what to expect from the Seahawks defense. They're playing a lot of young guys. They're playing a rookie at right corner. They're playing a guy who's starting full-time for the first time at left corner. Although there's a chance that Sidney Jones will take that spot back this week for Mike Jackson, but he played really well. And even Tariq Woolen, who ended up with a low PFF grade because of the 2 PI calls, his coverage was excellent. He looked like a pro out there at 6'4" and 230, whatever he is. But it's a new scheme. They gave up massive chunks of yardage, but then they came up with the turnovers in the red zone. They made the big stops when they had to, a couple of stops on third down. So I still don't know what to make of this defense. And I tend to think for a while anyway, until they tighten things up and really get familiar with that scheme, that we're going to see more of what we saw on Monday. They're probably going to give up a lot of yardage. They're going to give up a lot of ground between the 20s, and it'll just come down to whether they can be ball hawkers and get that ball, especially from a young quarterback. So lots of variables in this game. I'm just fascinated to watch how it all unfolds.
Is Quandre Diggs going to play? Because I saw he didn't practice on Wednesday. If he's out, makes a huge difference, because he's one of the best safeties in the league.
He is, and they lost Jamal Adams for the season too, and as much as they like their safety depth with Ryan Neal and the young kid Josh Jones, it's still it's young. It's not Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams, so there's adjustments to be made, and now there's a scheme adjustment because they were going to use, and they had used in the first half Monday, Jamal Adams the way they intended to use him when they acquired him from the Jets, and moving him all over the place and just kind of having him be a Swiss Army knife and playing a lot of 3 safety looks. That's going to change now. And so you need Diggs more than ever to play that back half. Pete Carroll tends to be overly optimistic when it comes to injuries. He didn't sound that concerned. I'd be surprised if he doesn't play, although he might not practice between now and Sunday. So we'll have to see.
Oh, I just get agita. Seahawks week, I get agita. I will not feel comfortable until literally the clock is at 0 and the 49ers are ahead, if that's what happens. Other than that, until then, I'm going to be white knuckling it the whole way through.
Yeah, and it's funny because on your half of things, I think this is our first look at the new era of 49er football, right? I mean, Trey Lance is going to be the guy, whether there are moments this year where Garoppolo has to come in and contribute or not. At some point, it's his franchise. The Seahawks aren't going to do that till next year. So we're still kind of in this weird limbo phase where, we want to see what the rest of the roster looks like. We want to see that kind of development. In a lot of ways, it reminds us of 2012, before there, or 2011, when they added guys like Chancellor and KJ Wright, and they built up that offensive line and traded for Marshawn Lynch and built a foundation so they could go add the young quarterback the next year in Russell Wilson. That's what 2023 is about. So, or 2024. No, 23. What year is
23. It's 22 now. So yeah, you're right. This year is about building it up and evaluating who's going to stick around and be a part of that next generation, and who can you cut loose. And if that's all that you get out of this year, and I'm not saying it is, but if that's all that you get out of this year, that's still incredibly valuable.
It's weird that Monday went and threw a wrench in all of this. It's just a weird feeling among the fan base right now. Like, what do we do? Because I think most of us agree we'd like a top 5 pick. There's 4 or 5 legit first round quarterbacks right now that we'd like to have, but we'd like to have our choice of them and not have to mortgage the farm to move up and get the guy that we want. So, I think there's a lot of Seahawks fans that are perfectly content to lose some games as long as the games are fun and maybe they show they're competitive. But Monday kind of threw a wrench in things like, what now? Like, what if we can be kind of good? It's an odd place to be. And it's a drama that I can't wait to watch unfold. All right. I really appreciate you coming on. I want to get your take. Let me just do this. I meant to ask you this, and then we kind of got off track. I just want an outsider's point of view on what happened at the end of that game Monday.
It's absurd. It's absurd. None of it makes any sense. First of all, why didn't Russ just call a timeout? Like, what? Just call timeout, dude. Like, Peyton Manning is sitting there on the Manning cast, like screaming, basically, like, call timeout. What are you doing? Russ, the whole franchise is about Russ now. They traded a zillion picks to get him. Giving him control of the franchise is what this year was all about. So if he doesn't feel empowered to call a timeout, that's really weird. And Nathaniel Hackett's defense of it is just terrible. And even when he said, oh, yeah, we definitely should have gone for it, he couched it by saying, because we missed the field goal. Like, he doesn't get that trying the second longest field goal in NFL history was the wrong choice in that scenario.
And there's so much. I've never seen in a situation like that any team ever not try to at least draw the other team off sides. Come up under center, do the hard count, something that Russell did pretty well when he was here and liked doing. And as aggressive as you'd think that our defense was going to be trying to get off the ball and make that stop, that shocks me as much as the decision itself. And then, cloaked in the whole, he was supposed to be empowered and it was going to be a player run organization there. And he was kind of a player coach. Did you see the video today? So he was mic'd up. Did you see the video this morning of Russ on the sidelines imploring the guys on the sidelines to yell run or pass when they saw what was happening on the field? As soon as we get out, you have to look it up. It's like, I remember doing that in junior high school, Pony League football. It's insane. And you've seen Russ when he's fired up and he's mic'd up, right? He gets stuck in his zone. He just says the same thing over and over again. Believe, that kind of stuff. It's just, come on, guys, it's run or pass. You got to yell it. Run. Do you think there's any player in the NFL who plays on defense who would ever hear something yelled from the sideline and then incorporate that into their reactions on what's happening in front of it? It's bizarre.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason why, for a guy that has won pretty much at a level unmatched by everybody except the New England Patriots in his career, there are people that do not like him. Doug Baldwin, Richard Sherman. I think Marshawn Lynch had issues with him at times. I mean, look, I don't have to tell it to you and your audience. for like all Russ does is win pretty much, but yet there's so many people that do not like him. And I think that's part of it. It just comes off as like rah rah and inauthentic. And like, also, like, who are you talking to? Those are grown men on the sideline. This isn't a little league game.
Right. Yeah. It is one of the fascinating things about this whole dynamic. And I've been on either side of it. Like I appreciate him as a player. But I got tired of that stuff. And
did you go to the game?
Yeah, I was there.
Did you cheer or boo when he came out on the field?
I didn't do either. I just watched it unfold.
You gotta cheer. You have to cheer. He's the best player your team has ever had, and he led you to the best era of Seahawks football in franchise history. How could you not cheer him?
I think the moment for that will come. I was surprised. I don't know. In retrospect, maybe not. But there was a thought that the Seahawks would do some sort of video kind of homage and tribute to him at some point. There was nothing. Wow. There was some. I mean, we know about the bitterness, and it's funny you talk about cashing in receipts, right? When all that reporting was going, and it goes back to, I think Seth Wickersham in that piece he wrote for ESPN about 4 years ago was the first one to kind of blow the top off that. And Seahawks fans on that report and every report that followed, there was the one in The Athletic last year that was sourced by multiple reporters and a lot of inside contacts. Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And Seahawks fans refuse to believe that all this talk was legitimate the last few years, that teammates didn't like Russell, that we were trying to trade him, that we would trade him. Now it's all coming out. And there's even more. It's going to be a great 30 for 30 someday, because there's stuff we haven't heard yet, and we won't hear until Russ isn't playing anymore. Pete's out of the league. Maybe even John Schneider's moved on from his role. There's stuff we still haven't heard. But the fact that you mentioned all those players, just the fact that Doug Baldwin alone was on the sideline, says a lot, because most people have come to understand and assume that he's one of the guys that had the biggest problem with Russ. And some of the things he says haven't even really been that well cloaked. I think he had some issues. So but even those guys appreciate what he did for the organization. I was shocked that it was so many boos. I knew there'd be some, but it was 80%.
That's wild to me.
It was 80%.
And I get that, like, he's the opponent and stuff, but cheering him just when he walks in the stadium for the first time after all that he has done there, I thought I was really surprised by it.
And I'll be interested to see too. You talk about how, the team had months to prepare for this game, and they were on an emotional high, and how will they respond coming off of it? It'll be interesting to see what Lumen Field's like week 3, because I said it was the loudest it's been since the Super Bowl year. That crowd's gotten complacent. And some of that, I think, was being spoiled. Some of that was, new blood moving into town and new fans and corporate tickets and all of that. But they were ready Monday because there were reasons to be ready. There was emotion flying high. When that's gone and the Falcons come in on week 3, it'll be interesting, because they were doing that thing that they did. I call it the Jake Delhomme effect, that 2005 championship game, where they, from the moment the Broncos entered the huddle, they were screaming at the top of their lungs. It wasn't Guinness Book of World Record type decibel level, but it was enough to affect the game, and it did affect the game. I wonder, now that they don't have Russ anymore, and they do recognize it's a rebuild, if that'll remain and we can get that home field advantage back. I don't know. Talk to me about the environment in Santa Clara at Levi Stadium. It's been uneven, hasn't it been? What do you expect as far as the atmosphere there on Sunday?
Well, certainly during the lean years, even in the early Shanahan years, it was just a terrible. There was zero home field advantage for the 49ers there. You can go on social media and find all the pictures of the empty stadium. The 49ers beat writers used to tweet them out. It was bad. But since 2019, when they've been consistently, for the most part, good, it has turned into an incredible home field advantage, especially in primetime games. The fans really go nuts. It's been kind of wild, and it's really actually the fan base has shown up when the 49ers are on the road. Even if you go watch that Bears game, I mentioned that Brandon Ayuk completion that he had. When he catches that ball, there is an eruption from the stand. Niner fans travel, man. It has been bizarre, but Levi's is turning into a nice home field advantage. We just need to see the 49ers play consistent there. That's why I'm hoping right out of the gates, do a play action with Lance and let it fly, man. You hit a big completion right out of the gates, and the roof is going to, well, there's no roof, but you know what I mean. That place is going to explode.
Well, and I think it'll be a cool atmosphere because I think they'll be the fans will be looking to get back on the winning side in that rivalry and also kind of put the Seahawks in their place because they're feeling a little good after the Monday night game. So 105 on Sunday at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara. Rob Guerrera, thanks for joining me. Let people know where they can find you and listen to the podcast and what you got coming up this week.
So the Niners Nation podcast is available iTunes, Spotify, everywhere you get your pods. We do shows, 2 shows a day, almost every day of the week. And you can find me on all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I am at Stats on Fire. Reach out. DMs are open. I like to say I'm there for the arguments.
Love it. And we'll talk again in December. Until then, I am Dan Viennes. We'll talk to you after the game Sunday night with my rapid reaction after the 49ers and the Seahawks. Until then, I'll talk to you later. Cool. I will edit out the awkward pregnant pause.
Yeah, sorry. You know what? That was my fault.
Had to bring you.
I knew you were going to me, and I was like, I don't know what to say. I left you hanging.
And I think I was ready to wrap up at that point, and then the pause made me have another thought. So
no, totally fine.
I can see it in the waveform here. We'll just cut that out.
Is it a little weird in Seattle right now because for the first time in 20 years, and I know this because I'm a Mariners fan.
Oh yeah,
that like the team is good. Are people like divided there?
Between the Mariners and the Seahawks?
Yeah.
It's an awkward feeling, but I've always said that this town is a secret baseball town. Like as soon as you look at last year when they were 4 games out trying to get that last wild card and rally at the end, and they got hot. Like suddenly that stadium was selling out. And
Seattle's a great sports town. Really, when they're good, like I remember when the Mariners used to lead the league in attendance. Like when they're good, the people show up big time.
Yeah. And with the Mariners, it's been weird the last 10 years because there have been a lot of years where they were goodish, like 500, borderline contenders, but they just haven't been fun to watch. But now with the young guys and with Julio's
so good.
There's a personality on this team that's infectious, and now the pitching and Castillo is fun to watch. And I think there's a belief now that this is a team that can. I mean, they're still a couple bats short. No one thinks they're going to make a deep World Series run, but they can cause some problems for teams with their pitching. I mean, certainly in a 3-game series.
I bet on them to make the World Series in February.
Interesting. I mean, the pitching can do it. The pitching can do it. It's just it's hard to imagine it without Haniger and Winker doing anything.
Freaking Haniger, man. He's always hurt.
And he's such a likable player, and he's such a good player. I mean, he's their best hitter when he's healthy, and he just can't stay healthy. I had thought even leading up to last week that there's got to be a way you can find a way to bring him back, at least on a 1-year deal, let him build up some value again. I don't know. At this point, you might just want to find another bat somewhere else. And I don't know. And Winker's just been a massive disappointment. But thankfully, it was supposed to be that we traded for him, and Suarez was the throw-in to eat his salary, so we didn't have to give as much up in return. And he's been for all you haven't heard anything about how they shouldn't have moved on from Kyle Seager this year. That was a big deal last year.
It's true.
And he's been better. Borderline Gold Glove defense.
Yeah, very good defense at third.
Yeah, 31 home runs, and he's a huge clubhouse presence. He's a big part of the personality of that team, and just the timeliness of their home runs. And then Julio is just, I think one of those transcendent guys that gets people excited. So,
he's the best player I've seen them have since A-Rod.
Yeah.
And I kind of put Ichiro in a little separate category because he was 28, I think, when he came over. Yeah. Like Julio is freakishly good, fastest player ever to 25. Like, that's unbelievable. And
he just seems to be getting, he thrives in big moments, and that's always the difference for me when you look at young players. Some guys come through in those moments, and some don't. And 2 leadoff home runs on this homestand, and game-winning grand slam and some of those walk-off things he's done. And the fact they signed him long-term shuts a lot of the old, burned, damaged Mariner fans. He'll just end up playing for someone else. We're developing him for the Yankees, all that bullshit. $500 million potentially says a lot. And now I think if they go do the same thing with Castillo as someone to build around too, because I think he's similar to Julio in some ways, just that personality and plus the talent. And I think he wants to be here. So I was a fan of the rebuild from the day it started. And it hasn't gone great. Like Kelnick's been a bust and Kyle Lewis has been a bust and Evan White's been a bust. And those were guys that were going to build it around, but they found some ways. It's fun. I'm going to try to I'm going to hit every game on that last series against the Royals, because they're all like afternoon games.
No games left against teams over 500, which is unbelievable. Like if they're ever going to end this streak, this is the year. There's no excuse.
So you like stats. It's your damn nickname, right? So I just wrote this stuff down yesterday because I was curious. The combined record of the 5 teams they play the rest of the way is 40%. It's 285 and 427, and they're a combined 146 and a half games out of first place. Those 5 teams.
Wow! And if you get the top wild card, and then you get 3 games at home, and you could go Castillo, Ray, and I don't know, pick your poison, Gilbert or Kirby.
I know. I would have a week and a half ago. I would have said Kirby, but Gilbert's found something again. He kind of was scuffling there for a little while after the All-Star break, but he's been locked in, and I don't think they're concerned about Kirby's workload. He seems to be getting stronger. Maybe it's just a matchup thing and what they think of the lineup they're going to face. But God, I'm excited about both those guys.
Let me just tell you, if they shut one of those guys down or limit one of those guys' innings, after I have sat here from the time I was 16 years old, I'm now 37 with 2 kids and haven't seen a playoff game.
Right.
If they give me innings limit with those guys, I'm going to lose my mind. What? Like, let them go. What are you waiting for?
And no matter who they go with, you got the other guy in the pen that can come out. It's and you can even use Marco in some lefty matchups then too. And it'll be exciting to see. I mean, ultimately that offense is going to have to perform. And I don't know if 2 hot bats is going to be enough to get it done. France has shown signs of kind of breaking out of his slump.
He's banged up though. His wrist is not.
Yeah, it's been intermittent. You can see it. There's some bad swings. And he's chasing things and he usually doesn't chase. If he can get it going, Haniger aside, I don't even think there's a lot of discussion here this week that Winker might not even be on the postseason roster because Haggerty, much better in left field and obviously better hitter, better on the base paths and all of that. I mean, if Haniger's healthy and he's in right field, then I think Haggerty's your left fielder.
I feel like he's such a good postseason player too. Rangy, just a headsy player, can put the bat on the ball. Like to me, it's like Winker. I'm all set. I have seen enough to know that I have seen too much of Jesse Winker.
Yeah. And he has 5 years of a track record. I think this is the outlier. I look for him to do some things in the off season and find some things and be productive again next year. But for now, like cut the cord. Let's try to make a run at this thing.
Oh my God. I just honestly, I feel like once they get in, they're going to be a tough out. And you're right about the offense, but like, I feel like offense in the postseason is always a little depressed.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a good point. You just need to come up with the timely hit.
And they're good in close games. It's going to be so much. Like I've never had this before where I have like football season going on and I still have to care about baseball. It's really messing with my mind. Usually the season's over by May.
It is a weird dynamic right now. It really is in this town because I think, again, I think people kind of expected it. It had been growing to a point where it's like, well, I guess we're going to focus on the Mariners for the next couple of months because Seahawks aren't going to be fun to watch. Well, now, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. It is fun. And I think next year, we're hosting the All-Star game. They got a bunch of money available to spend. They're at that point with their roster where they could go kind of sell out for that, 2 bats and maybe 1 more arm to put them over the top. And, we'll see. My one concern is that, as good as the bullpen's been, unless they decide to use Munoz more as the closer, in the postseason. I love Paul Sewald, love his fire, and I love what he's done to resurrect his career. I don't know if I'm going to trust him as the everyday closer in the postseason. So that'll be interesting to see, because they don't really use a closer role anyway. They kind of mix and match. And
the one guy I don't trust at all and would be super happy if I never, ever, ever saw him again is Diego Castillo. He's like Fernando Rodney all over again. He takes 50 years in between pitches. He goes 3 balls on everybody. It's like he's the worst kind of reliever for me. I want no part of him. If they could leave him off the postseason roster, I would love it.
That's the buzz up here now too. It's, and even
really?
when he's good, it's not, it's shaky,
Yeah.
You'd rather see Swanson in that spot, or once you even, shrink down the starting rotation, like, Chris Flexen's in that bullpen. He can do some things, or you move one of those other guys back there. And so we'll see. Should be fun.
20 games.
I know. I haven't seen yet what our magic number is, but just the fact we have one. Right. We have a magic number. We haven't had one of those in a long time.
And they have the tiebreaker over the Blue Jays too, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah. If they can host the Blue Jays here, that would be, because the Blue Jays fans always turn out big time. That would be, although I think for a playoff game, I wonder if they would make that harder to get tickets, how they do that sometimes. But either way, I think, although, God, up until this last homestand, the way they played against the Braves and the Padres, like, you could make an argument they play better on the road. We've had a couple clunker homestands in the second half, but I think that crowd will just be insane. I'll mortgage an entire paycheck to go to a game.
It's so much fun when that place is rocking. Like, I forgot, I'm so used to it being like that for the Yankees and the Red Sox and stuff. Like, their home field advantage could be wild. So I'm giddy. Baseball is actually my favorite sport. And so, like, now to finally get the chance to have a playoff game, I keep telling my son, who's like, he's 7 years old now, he's starting to get into it. And I was like, if you think dad is nuts during the 49ers playoff games, wait till you see me during a Mariners playoff game. I'm going to be pacing around the house.
So how did you end up being a Mariner fan?
So I am a pain in the ass, basically. So I live in Connecticut. I've always lived in Connecticut, and we don't have our own teams. So I was always asking, like, my dad, like, who do we root for? And he was like, well, you can pick between the Yankees, the Red Sox, and the Mets. And I was like, well, why? There's other teams. And he was like, yeah, but you can't really root for another team. And of course I was like, yeah, I can. And it just so happened at the time that my dad's company that he worked for used to get these incredible Red Sox tickets, third baseline, front row, right behind where the photographers take the pictures. They were unbelievable. And for some reason, every time we would go, they would play the Mariners. And it was the Ken Griffey Jr., Jay Buhner Mariners. All they did was bash home runs constantly. So I kind of fell in love with them. And then I was just like, well, I don't have to pick between these 3 teams. I'm taking all the West Coast teams, which is why I'm Mariners and Niners. And I was a Sonics fan. So now I'm a Thunder fan, because the move did not sting me personally as someone who doesn't live in Seattle.
Right.
So I'm all weird teams.
All right. I got you. That's cool. That's fun. I might have to have you on to talk Mariners. I've pretty much retired my own show since I moved over to Field Goals, but I'll probably fire it up a couple of times to talk some Mariner baseball. Once we get to play. So yeah, we'll let you spread your Mariner wings a little bit.
All right.
All right, man. Thanks. I'll get this cleaned up and processed, and I'll send it over to you. So you can do with it what you want, and then I'll share the link. It'll probably be up in about an hour.
Oh, thank you, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your time.
See you.